welcome to this ET Now special. We're calling it Trouble in the Skies because that's literally what it seems like in the air. In the last few weeks, there have been a slew of bad news coming in from airlines like INDIGO as well as Jet Airways. If INDIGO has reported a disastrous fall in its profit, Jet Airways is in the news for supposed layoffs at the airline and also asking for pay cuts of its pilots as well as other staff. What's going on? How supposed layoffs at the airline and also asking for pay cuts of its pilots as well as other staff. What's going on? How is this entire story unraveling? Let's take this conversation forward with Kapil Kaul, the CEO and Director at Kappa South Asia. I'm also being joined by Jitendra Bhargav, the former Executive Director at Air India. Dheeraj Mathur, Partner and Leader at Aerospace and Defense of PwC, is joining us, as is Kinjal Shah, the Vice President of Corporate Sector Ratings at ICRA. Thank you so much to all of my panelists for joining me for this special show. Trouble in the Skies is what we are calling it. Kapil, good evening. It's Nayantara. I'll come to you first. I'll begin with Jet Airways. You know, that has really been the trigger for us doing this special show, Trouble in the Skies. We've all been reading over the last 48 hours how all is not well at Jet Airways. There has been a crucial meeting. We perhaps need to brace ourselves for major layoffs at the airline, beginning first with pay cuts of almost 25%. Kapil, you know, this is an airline which has tied up with one of the world's richest airlines, Etihad. It's also entered into a metal neutrality pact, which means it can use literally the metal of other companies, the aircraft of other companies, be it Virgin, be it KLM, be it Delta. What's going on? Why should then Jet be in so much trouble?
First of all, I think when you look at employee rationalization, which could include remuneration rationalization, I don't think we should just, possibly overplay it, because the airline's core is to remain competitive. Obviously, if the going was good, then these rationalization are not required. Normally, in a growth mode, you would expect people to be inducted rather than rationalized. You would like to see people getting higher increases on an yearly basis than asking them for a pay cut. But when the situation demands it's nothing new. This is done globally. When the situation is little stressed, your revenue is not in your control. You try to ensure that you increase your productivity, reduce your workforce, and try to become as competitive as possible. So what Jet is doing is the need of the hour. Whichever levers they have, one of the levers is to address the employee cost. There are other measures that they will have to take. So I don't see we shouldn't necessarily overplay it. But it also reflects that there is stress. And the stress has been there for long. And that stress will play out much more aggressively when the dynamics change, when there is a cost pressure, when there is a revenue pressure, both on domestic and international. So that stress is visible across airlines. In the case of Jet, that stress may be much higher because of some legacy issues, but the stress is across the industry. But I don't think we should treat the employee rationalization and remuneration rationalization as something negative. These are measures when you have to restructure, and this is done world over. So there's nothing new about it. We should be more talking about how they can come out of the stress. How can they recapitalize? How quickly it can recapitalize? What are the other measures that can restore stability? Obviously, they're doing a lot at their end, but I don't think everything is in their hand, because as the shift in dynamics are much faster. That's where our story should be as to what next for them. But these measures that they are taking is in line with what the business requires, and I would expect that the rationalization, both in terms of people and both in terms of remuneration, could be more could be higher going forward.
I take your point. Okay, I take your point, and I'm going to pose that question now to Dheeraj Mathur. Neeraj Mathur, this is also an industry which has to make significant investments. There is a need to replace fleet. We've seen what's happened with INDIGO and the A320 engine debacle. Even if you look at Jet Airways aircraft, you keep hearing about how they're outdated. They're certainly not in the same swanky condition as the newer airlines. Clearly, Jet also needs to spend money on that. Where is this business going to get all this moolah from? You're also talking at a time when ATF prices are high. Crude is continuing to be on the boil. The government and the states are not bringing ATF under the GST, so they're not going to get much relief under the taxation. And meanwhile, is a consumer which is going on having to pay more. Besides the discounted airfare, the airfares have only been going up.
Well, look, we have crude around $80 a barrel. It's gone over 100. It's gone as high as 110. Clearly, I mean, the problems are around the costs. And there are some costs which are under the control of Jet Airways, and there are some which aren't. I'll come to the issue of, where they're going to get the money for the investments that are required in a moment. But we need to understand one thing, that as far as the cost structure is concerned, fuel accounts for about 40 to 50% of the cost of almost all airlines. So when your fuel prices go up from around $30 a barrel to almost over $80 a barrel, obviously everybody's feeling the pinch, including Jet, and that's a cost that's not under their control. So the pay cut that they're talking about, I think that's not. I mean, that is one. I read it's about a 500 crore rupee saving on their salary bill of 3,000. So that's a significant cost saving, and therefore what they're doing is sensible. You control the costs that are under your control. You bring those down. Those that aren't, there's nothing much you can do about them. So therefore, this is a positive to my mind. Of course, it's painful for the employees, but there could be some element of rationalization in this as well. Now, coming back to the larger issue, Jet already has orders of, I think, over 275 or so of Boeing Maxes, which are fuel efficient. So they will help offset some of the issues around fuel costs. They have that in the pipeline. And the fact is that they made 2 years of profit, and last year they didn't make a profit. They made a loss. It's difficult to say, give a clear answer where a company is going to raise money from. Obviously, they have their promoters. They do have the capital markets. They have those options that are available. There is the possibility of fresh infusion of equity to possibly raise more capital. That, I think, is something that the promoters would best answer. We can only speculate, and there's no point in speculation. But stepping back, the growth of the sector continues. There's a huge amount of investment that the government has in the pipeline to expand infrastructure. Udan is doing well. Passenger traffic has been growing. Of course, the growth in May was subdued compared to April. But all the fundamentals of the Indian economy are fine. The fundamentals of the aviation sector in India are fine. This is
take your point. There's the green shoots in the economy. I take your point, Dheeraj. I take your point. The green shoots in the economy, the recent macroeconomic data also points to it. This is also a government which has tried to open up the skies. It's come out with an Udan scheme. You are seeing better penetration across India in the smaller cities as well. But Jitendra Bhargav, let me come to you. So while you have a government trying to open the skies and coming out with this Udan scheme, and you are seeing better network, is it only fair to blame crude oil prices for the mess that the airlines are in? Let's be honest, flash sales do take place. There has been a tariff war that you've seen in the past. At one point, maybe no one thought that, they're going to go down this way, or there were fears of running out of cash. So aren't the airlines and their business models also to blame, Jitendra Bhargav?
See, people who have been associated with the industry for long are fully aware that in the aviation industry, you have periodic downturns where all airlines get affected. India is fortunate that we've had a fairly long period of sustainability, good performance, because as reflected in the high load factors and the kind of growth that Indian market has witnessed. I agree with what you are saying, that airline business model is also to blame. There is no denying the fact that India is a hugely price-sensitive market. But why are the airlines trying to market or sell a seat below the cost of producing a seat? Even when the ATF prices were down, they were making only marginal profit. This price sensitivity has been there, and it reflects, the moment you increase fares, it reflects in the load factors. Now, you can either chase load factors or you can chase profitability. Now, what they have unfortunately done is to have said each one recording or competing to be 90% plus as far as load factors are concerned. What are the cost factors? Now, we all know that ATF prices are beyond an airline's control. Navigation, landing charges, airport charges are all beyond it. Now, the only element that you can look at is the services rendered to a passenger, which is in-flight, food, etc., plus the employee's salary. Now, I must applaud Jet Airways that they have read the writing on the wall and taken action prior to getting a difficult problem kind of a thing. It's better to read the writing on the wall and take action. So when they have suggested to employees or are going to be introducing pay cuts in salary, it's a very healthy measure, and we shouldn't be looking at anything bad. This is a standard practice adopted world over. Because when an airline makes profit, what happens? Employees also get bonuses. So therefore, when we look at it, the Indian market, airlines perhaps will have to look at it. The other important point is that last 6, 7, 8 years, we haven't had a reasonably large-size airline entering.
I do hope that I do hope, Mr. Bhargav, that when the going was good, that Jet Airways did share the bonanza with their employees, whether it was by bonuses or salary hikes. We don't have data to that effect. I admit that. I'll need to go through the previous annual reports.
Just one point. I would also like to blame the media to a certain extent, that every time there's a very modest fare increase, media comes hammer and tong on the airlines that fares are being increased. Don't they have a right to be economically viable? Should they not be recovering the cost of producing a seat? Now, this is where we got to understand that there are economics involved, and India, the fares, the yield as we measure it on earnings per kilometer of passenger flown is the lowest in the world. So why should we be cribbing if there is a fare increase and airlines are trying to be economically viable?
You know, I have never been successful, and I'll just make this an observation in a personal way, because I can only do that. Whenever I've tried to buy a ticket on those flash sales, I've never succeeded. If I'm on a full flight, it costs the same as if it's a half full flight, it's the same price. Kinjal Shah, let me come to you now. Are you going to downgrade all of these airlines at the moment? Are the prospects looking bad? And now with crude on the boil, do you see a lot of them going to the Middle Eastern carriers to try and rescue them, as we had seen in the past as well, when the last time Etihad boarded Jet Airways?
Yeah, definitely. See, the crude oil price increase has been a concern. There have been a lot of headwinds over the last 2 years. FY16, we had seen that airlines benefited a lot because of the decline in fuel prices. But even in the current year, if you see, the ATF prices have risen by around 33% in the first 5 months on a YOY basis. So that doesn't really hold good for the airlines. Definitely, airlines are trying to recoup it through cost rationalization initiatives. But say cost rationalization like employee salary cuts, etc., how much would they actually benefit? Because if you see the employee cost, that is around 11 to 13% of the total revenues of the aggregate industry as such. So whether that would really help them benefit, I think the entire benefit would come only when they have the pricing power to improve the yields. In the past, when we've seen the increase in crude oil prices, the rise in yields has been very marginal. So unless there is a structural change in the RASK levels improvement, when the cost is improving so much, costs are increasing so much, unless the spread improves, the RASK CASK spread, that would really hit the airlines, and that's what even we expect, that the losses, the net loss for the industry as such will be increasing in FY19.
Okay, so you're expecting this pain to continue, the turbulence to stay, and the airlines to remain in a tailspin for now. Kapil Kaul, let me come to you. What about, let's say, other airlines? You know, clearly all is not well at INDIGO. You've also seen a major rejig at the top management. Now you're getting this flow of jet flow, which you think that we should not be reading too much into it. Air India, the government tried to sell for whatever reasons. They couldn't find a single buyer. Would you say that SpiceJet, Go Air, Vistara, they're also in the same bit of bother?
Well, if you look at INDIGO's results, the results were that fact that they would have a profitability dip was expected, but the decline, the sharp decline in their profitability was really surprising. When you have a CASK increase of 20% and a yield decline of 5%, this is what is expected. So it shows that even in the leader in the market is significantly stressed. But I would still say that if you look at INDIGO, SpiceJet and Go Air, these three LCCs, I would still see them profitable for this fiscal. Though end of quarter 2, one would know the direction of their profitability. If you look at full service, I would expect that impact to be much more severe on the full service airlines, which includes Air India, which includes Jet Airways as well. So the three LCCs who have been in the market for some time, my assessment is they would be profitable. The losses would be higher for full service, and that's what we expect going forward in this fiscal. But as far as INDIGO is concerned, it's going through a transition. I'm sure they would have factored in the cost of this transition. Obviously, the transition may have impacted a bit on Q1 results as we move from one regime to the other regime. By the time the new regime settles, it takes time. So obviously, it would have impacted to some extent on Q1 results. But I think the transition has to be well managed, and has to be quickly managed, and I see that happening with them. Though the results in Q1 has been significantly a surprise. But the quicker they can get a handle on the transition, quicker that will bring stability. My assessment is that the yield decline in INDIGO has been much sharper than one would expect, given the fact that the cost have increased by 20%. But one would have to see how quickly they stabilize and what will be the changes as far as the transition is concerned. Because clearly they have a very aggressive business plan to execute. They're getting so many planes. They have some delivery issues as well. So the transition has to be well managed, and I think they are focusing on the transition. But overall, there is a stress across industry when costs go up and the yield is significantly a decline. You would expect that your profitability will be hit. And I have always believed that the cost of running an airline in India is never adequately compensated by fare inputs. There are pockets in a year, in Q1 and possibly closer to the December, month of December. Largely, the cost inputs are not adequately compensated by fare inputs. It's a price-sensitive market. We add more capacity than it's required. When the going is good, we don't boost our liquidity for a down cycle that happens. The balance sheet doesn't have, except maybe INDIGO, very rarely any airline has a cash. So when you're doing well, you focus and boost liquidity either by getting fresh capital or raising funds to make sure when your cycle is down, you have enough cash to survive. Clearly, that doesn't happen here. There is a liquidity challenge with most of these airlines. So this is a business model issue. In the case of Jet, it may be a legacy issue. In INDIGO, it is different. But primarily, I would think that Indian carriers are not adequately capitalized for the kind of growth that they're envisaging, and that will clearly reflect as dynamics shift in cycles deeply.
But clearly the airlines have been caught napping in that sense, is what you're saying. When the going is good, they have not set aside enough funds for a down cycle. You're making a case that the fares are not high enough, except for in the peak season of, let's say, a December, where we all joke about how on New Year's it's more cheap to go to Thailand for a holiday than to maybe go to Goa. Dhiren Mathur, let me come to you. Would you agree with Kapil Kaul on what he has said, and the solution may be to capitalize, for these airlines to go and try to capitalize themselves. Because I'm going to make a point, and it may not be a very popular point. When Kingfisher Airlines went down, Vijay Mallya had said the 5/25 rule was unfair, that he was discriminated against, that there was no FDI, which he kept asking for the government. And today, Naresh Goyal can't say that, Rahul Bhatia cannot say that, Ajay Singh cannot say that, the Wadias of Go Air cannot say that. They have literally opened up the skies.
And that, sorry. By the way, I am in Goa, so it's interesting that you mentioned Goa. But no, the 5/25, that rule had to go. That was patently unfair. I mean, it just didn't make sense. And you know, ultimately, all domestic markets are very competitive, whether it's India or any other country. The airlines really make money on the international routes. So if you constrain our own airlines to fly domestically only, and then you impose the social obligation of, you know, the route dispersal and so on, regional connectivity obligations on them, where are they going to build up that war chest that is going to help them during the lean period, as now? Now, I mean, yes, prices did fall significantly to under 40 2 years back, and airlines did make money. But bear in mind that there was a sort of a golden period of about 2 years, and otherwise they've been struggling with very thin profit margins. So, you know, to expect them to build up a war chest just of domestic operations is, I think, probably not entirely reasonable. You expect them to obviously provision for to put cash on their balance sheets, but there is a limit if they're only limited to domestic operations. That's why the removal of that rule was welcome, and I mean, I've read some criticism, or you know, there's been some sort of controversy.
You know, we had actually seen. And that's exactly what the point I was trying to make. It's not going to make me very popular, but that's exactly what Vijay Mallya had said when Kingfisher Airlines crash landed, that the laws were against him and the government refused to open up, and now FDI is indeed permitted, and these airlines are allowed to travel overseas with much more relaxed norms. Jitendra Bhargav, I'm going to come to you. This is also not going to make me very popular. Do you see scary comparisons between the aviation sector and the telecom sector? Both highly regulated, both highly taxed, both not, and also with the indulgent parties indulging themselves, engaging in a tariff war, and clearly never preparing for a downturn. And look what happened with the telecom sector. Do you see scary parallels?
No, this is what I said earlier. India is a price-sensitive market. You can't deny it. But should airlines be pandering to them? The answer is no. Airlines got to be first protecting their profitability and economic viability. Why should they be chasing load factors?
Mr. Bhargav, my point is that when each of these companies entered the aviation business, they knew what they were getting into. They knew exactly how heavily regulated it is. They knew how much ATF is taxed at, and obviously anyone getting into the airline business has to hedge for higher crude oil prices too.
Nayantara, I'm not blaming any of those factors, nor am I a strong advocate of airlines saying the government must make things easier for them. I'm saying each airline ought to be looking at their own economics. And you cannot say, okay, I'm being driven by the market. You've got to be driven by your economics. And now that is what is it. Now once you'll have it, that, okay, you'll suffer for the short term, but in the long term, you'll be economically viable and not face these kind of crises. You can go through the last 25 years international aviation history, you will find periodic downturns where airlines' economics have been badly affected, whether it's through international events which affect tourism and travel, or it's basically fuel price increases. But it has happened. Now, there is no reason why Indian carriers should not be showing maturity and charge at least the fare that is spent on producing a seat. Now, Kapil was very rightly said, there are periods in our country where the fares are high, but bulk of the time, almost 6-7 months in a year, you find fares, Bombay to Delhi, 3,000 rupees. Now, that's 1,000 kilometer plus distance. 3 kilometers, 3 rupees a kilometer. Now, how can you be economically viable?
You're a travel agent, I've never paid so little.
Plus, no, come, I'll help you buy it. It is available, and I have seen people, and I've traveled myself on these kind of fares. No, you think you got to look at it, and plus the couple made a point in passing about the legacy carrier, full service carriers and the low cost carriers. Look at INDIGO's fares, for example. They almost match the fare of Vistara, Air India and Jet Airways, for example. Now, with their lower cost kind of a thing, how will full service carriers be able to make good the cost that they're incurring on providing food services, in-flight entertainment on board their flights? So there is something fundamentally wrong with the industry as well, and plus the airline promoters. Perhaps this kind of a current crisis will make them rethink and say what should be the right business model for a typical Indian market which is price sensitive.
But I have to observe that, I think 10 years ago, I was much younger maybe, but we were having the exact same debate in 2008 that the aviation sector is going through a rough pocket. At that time, you did see a few years down the line, FDI being opened up, the 5x25 going away. Let's see if anything actually changes in 2018 and how it is that all of these airlines recover and get out of the mess that they themselves have gotten into. They knew exactly what they were with the taxation and the dependence on crude oil prices. Unfortunately, I'm completely out of time, so I'm going to wrap up this special edition of Trouble in the Sky. And many thanks for all four of you for joining me live right here on ET Now.